All right, everyone, it's just going through parts, so we might make a start. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, particularly on school holidays. So I know that many, if not all of you, will actually be on leave at this point. So I really appreciate you taking some time out from your well-deserved leave to come together to talk about particularly AO2s in schools and where things are at with your bargaining and where to next. So thanks for making the time, really appreciate it. By way of introduction, my name's Dee Spink and I'm the Assistant Secretary of Together, and it's my great privilege this year to be working with our members in education directly around your collective bargaining as well. Before we get started this afternoon, I would of course like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting today across Queensland and potentially across Australia as well. For me, that is the Yagara and Turrbal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander members we might have with us here today. So, just a couple of housekeeping matters as well. We will keep this to under half an hour. Really don't want to cut into your very precious school holiday time. And we know that it is difficult for you to get some time away. We will be recording this session as well. I know we've had a number of members who expressed an interest in coming along today, but of course had other things on, which is absolutely understandable given that it is school holidays. As you might have seen in the chat as well, if you can direct any questions, particularly to education@together.org.au, that would be much appreciated. It is just me here today in terms of answering questions, so I'm not quite up to the multitasking of doing a presentation and answering questions at the same time, but you still can use that Q&A function. I believe we're able to get those questions at a later date, but the easiest way is probably to use the good old education@together.org.au email address. So thank you for that. Now, in terms of what we wanted to cover today, so obviously give you an update as to where we're at with bargaining. Just last week, we had some pretty significant updates come through the negotiations, so give you an update around that. Also, a little bit of history as to where we got to, where we have previously gotten to in relation to particularly AO2s in schools, and then looking specifically at, what is the problem around AO2s in schools and what are we trying to fix and how might we be able to do that? And then talking as well about the campaign itself and how we know we can make changes here in schools, in the Department of Education and in the public service more broadly. And then, of course, talk about some next tangible steps to take as well. For many of you online, this is probably nothing new to you, but I also know that we do have a lot of newer members potentially who haven't been through the collective bargaining process before. So what is collective bargaining? Collective bargaining is essentially the process, usually every 3 years or so, where union members come together to make a difference to their working lives. That might be through wage increases, which is always a part of collective bargaining, but also looking at conditions, classifications, leaves. There's a whole range of things. And hopefully everybody who is online as well has seen the log of claims that members and delegates pulled together earlier this year. So when we have a look at where we're at here in mid to late September and where we fall, I suppose, in the bargaining cycle and the steps of bargaining. So as you can see in that cartoon to the left there, we are still in negotiations with the department. So just to take one step back as well. So earlier in the year, members and delegates came together to prioritise the issues that they wanted to tackle throughout this bargaining campaign. So have put together both the log of claims, which is the list of issues that we want to address, as well as looking at how we ensure that we, have an organising campaign that means that we can make those things happen. Because it's all well and good to say these are the things we would like to see changed, but we also need to have that plan behind us to say this is how we're going to do it. So we've been in negotiations with the Department of Education for a number of months now. So where we are at is we have explained all of our claims. So again, hopefully people are familiar with the log of claims. If not, we can absolutely resend that out and let you know where to find it on the website. But we've gone through all of those claims. We've had delegates sitting around the table, being very eloquent and, can explain the issues and exactly why we think they are fair and reasonable claims. So negotiations to this point have been, they've certainly been respectful. The department has been receptive to the issues that we're raising, but the problem, at least up until last week, has been that the department hasn't had a bargaining framework. So they haven't actually been able to come to us and say, we understand you have this log of claims. These are the parameters within which we can negotiate with you. So, it might be that we have X amount of dollars, or we're told that, these are the sorts of issues that the department does have an interest in, so we can start to negotiate with you around it. Last week, we were told that the department does indeed now have a bargaining framework, which is excellent that we have, broached that step. But it is also somewhat frustrating because, as engaged members and delegates would know, your current EB expired on the 1st of September. So we are, 3 weeks out from your EB having expired, and to only now be getting that bargaining framework is a little bit frustrating, but we have that now, so we can continue to have those negotiations in earnest. The department has requested over the school holiday period that they're going to have their internal discussions. They've certainly heard from us for a number of months about the issues that our members are passionate about. So they've heard our side of the story, and now they've requested 2 weeks to have some internal discussions about what they think they might want to put on the table in terms of a response. So we'll wait to see what that is. We do have a number of negotiation meetings that are scheduled to occur when Term 4 resumes in October. And yes, of course, we will be keeping members apprised as to how those negotiations go and what the department's response is, because currently we don't have a response to any of our claims at this point. I should say as well that we have made it very clear to the department throughout negotiations that the claim around 802s in schools is a really key one for us in this room. Now, in terms of just a little bit of history, I suppose, around this claim and, 802s generally in schools, and I know that there will be many of you who are online who have been deeply involved in this, these, previous processes as well. So I'm certainly not telling you probably anything that you don't already know. But if we look at things like ROSAS, of course, there were some issues around particularly small school business managers, at that time being fixed and fixing the AET anomaly. Really significantly, in 2018, you were successful in getting a standalone Department of Education EB. So for a good number of years, I think it's probably 20 years at this point, members had been arguing to say, we are a big department. There's a lot of public servants employed by the Department of Education, but when it came to collective bargaining previously, you were part of the core EB, so that covers a really significant part of the public service. And while you are a very big department, sometimes members also found that they weren't able to progress and keep on fighting for the issues that they really cared about in schools. So the beauty of having your own EB means that now you can make those decisions, and you can fight for as long as you want, because it's you making the decisions just about what happens in the Department of Education. So that's really significant. And I think we saw some really great outcomes because of that, because you did have that autonomy last time around. So in the sort of, 2018, 2019, 2020 EB, for many of you, you were part of that very long process, which we are certainly hoping will not be repeated this time around. But in the last EB, we were successful in getting an fortnightly allowance for admin officers who are experienced within their schools, obviously based on service, years of service and months of service. Also looking at the maximisation of hours, and then working with the department to create those suite of AO3 PDs, but of course those still not part of the allocate. when we look at what we have already achieved through the current EB process, so about a fortnight ago, the wages policy, even though for a good number of months it had certainly been touted that the wages policy had changed thanks to some really great action that Together members and members from other public service unions took earlier in the year. So in the June state budget, we were very successful in changing the wages policy from 2.5% per year over the 3 years of the agreement to 4%, 4%, 3% in the last year of the agreement. And in addition to that, of course, looking at the current economic situation that we're in, there is also the possibility of one-off inflation compensation payments. So this is predicated on the fact that inflation remains above 4% or 3% for the relevant year. Also noting that it is capped at 3%. So that's a one-off inflation compensation payment. So for instance, if we wanted to look at, let's just say if inflation stays at 6% to next year for members in education, that would be an additional one-off payment of 2%. This is a really, absolutely a really good wages outcome, particularly when we look at the wages policies of other state governments across Australia. But one thing that we have seen for the first time as part of this wages policy, and is a very significant issue really for our members, particularly at that AO2, AO3 level, and particularly in education because of the gender balance there, is that there are some gender equity implications, because for the first time we're seeing those one-off payments based on people's wages rather than just a flat dollar amount. So many of you would remember the $12.50 from the last EB, which was, everybody gets $12.50 from if you're AO2, AO8, didn't matter, you got $12.50 if you're a full-time employee. But this time around, the difference between what an AO2, a 2% increase for an AO2 is very different to a 2% increase for an AO8. And this is the first time we've seen those, particularly when you consider the fact that this payment is intended to offset the increased cost of living. I think it's pretty obvious that, workers who are not earning as much are the ones who need more. So that's a real concern for us as a union. The wages policy isn't the only way that you can address the gender pay gap within an agreement, but it is a pretty significant one. And we are seeking to have conversations with the Special Commissioner for Equity and Diversity as well, employed within Queensland Government. So we will keep members updated about that. Now, when it comes to AO2s specifically in schools, when you look at, the intent, I suppose, of the AO2 role and then what is expected of you in schools, and again, I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but we know it is very different. So I think just a couple of things that really do, are very significant in the AO2 space within schools that are really worth highlighting and looking at as part of this process. So AO2s, particularly when we talk to departments about this, the intent around AO2s is that they are entry-level roles. So obviously, getting people into the department don't necessarily need to have any prior experience. But we also know that when we look at the schools experience, and in a very significant part due to the allocative model, but when we look at schools, we know that there are many, many AO2s who have a really significant amount of experience and service with the department. But because of because of the structure within schools, essentially, it's not an entry-level role, because an entry-level role would then suggest that there is ability to progress throughout that. And we know that's not the case at every school. We know that's not the case at many schools. Certainly when you think about, particularly given the fact that the allocative model was created in 1989, the technological advances that govern how you work have significantly and fundamentally changed the way that we do things. And certainly I would say there's a very significant argument that your productivity has increased because of that. And of course, you know, looking at the things we had to do differently because of COVID over the past 3 years, that certainly accelerated that, you know, digital transformation as well. You know, when you think about what is expected of an entry-level AO2 in another agency compared to an AO2 in a school, the problem solving, the de-escalation, all of the interactions that you have with students, parents, and other members of the school community, that's probably not expected of AO2s in other areas. So that is a really significant component to a lot of the work that I know you do as AO2s, and I would certainly argue does not at all match what an AO2 work level statement is really there. And of course, you know, we are constantly seeing that more functions and duties are being devolved to schools. So the expectation and the breadth of the work and the duties that you are doing in schools at that AO2 level is really significant and continues to expand rather than contract in most instances. So our plan, of course, is for AO2s to be upgraded to AO3s. And that is, you know, that's absolutely the claim, but I think we also do need to be realistic that that is a really big and expensive ask. So what we wanted to, you know, start the conversation with members about is, that is our claim, that is what's on the table. But if the agency comes back to us and says, we can't afford to do that, are we perhaps thinking about this and needing to look at it a bit differently? Because some of the, well, one of the key arguments that always comes to us when we are talking about, you know, AO2 to AO3, the government will always argue that there's a massive flow-on effect when we look at, you know, essentially what we're proposing is abolishing AO2s in schools. So the government will always argue that the abolishment of AO2s, particularly such a significant cohort as you are in the Department of Education, that's a really big issue for them because of the flow-on effects that it might have in other departments. We've definitely seen more recently that there is some movement around upgrading AO2 to AO3 roles in agencies, but we're talking about, you know, it could be the difference between 60 in an agency versus over 6,000 in the Department of Education. So there's definitely an economy of scale as well. And that has been something that has really, I think, held us back in a lot of these discussions, because there's a very binary view about, well, you know, we have this AO stream and it just goes AO2, A3, A4. Is that actually appropriate for what you do in schools? You know, is the work that AO2s do in schools actually appropriately classified as AO2? I would absolutely suggest that that is not the case. When we look at some other jurisdictions, they have some very specific classifications as well for their school-based staff. That's an option. There are also other options around looking at progression schemes. For instance, in the Department of Transport and Main Roads, they have an AO2 to an AO3 progression scheme. So absolutely not expecting any decisions to be made today. This is just wanting to start the conversation with our members about, you know, what are our options, and do we maybe need to think a little bit more outside of the square when it comes to addressing the recognition that you deserve and also the pay that you deserve for the very different work that you do in schools compared to an AO2 who's working in you know, a CBD building, for instance. So thank you everyone for having voted in that poll as well. I'll end that poll now, and I think we certainly have, you know, a fair amount of agreement about how people feel that the AO structure is not necessarily delivering for you in schools. So again, not something that we are asking you to make any decisions, because, as I said, our claim is for all AO2s to be reclassified to AO3. We don't have an answer from the department about that as yet, but we do want to, you know, you need to make that decision. Union members need to make the decision about where we go to if they come back and say, no, we can't change that. So simply starting the discussion today. So thank you for being part of that as well. One other aspect of the EB process as well that we wanted to talk about today, and we won't spend too much time on it because I am conscious of the time, but there is a resourcing review that is on the table. So this is, it certainly seems to us that it is a very large piece of work. So the department is talking about this being a comprehensive review of school resourcing arrangements, including methodologies, procedures and systems, essentially to bring the Department of Education into the 21st century, which is a very novel concept, isn't it, in 2022. So we have certainly been in negotiations, talking to the department about what sorts of things we would like to see addressed through that resourcing review. There are no terms of reference available for that yet, and we will certainly be consulted about the terms of reference, as will other unions within the department. But I think this is a really good opportunity for us to fundamentally look at the allocative model and everything else that goes into school resourcing to say that, for instance, it's not okay just to have an AO2 and then have the next model funded position be, for instance, an AO7 business manager. How on earth do you make that work? And you do it very creatively in schools, but it really does boggle the mind that there are instances like that where there's no stepping stones, where there is no real ability for delegating work or giving people the opportunity to progressively step up through that. So that is a real opportunity. I think, as we'll talk about in the last 5 minutes we have together, it's there on the table, but we also need to be in a position to be organised and strong to actually make a difference through that process as well. So how do we do that? How do we make change? And I think there's, I wish I could say that there is, 100% a bulletproof formula. There's not, but we've got a pretty good idea about what does make a difference when it comes to ensuring that the department takes on board your feedback and understands how strongly you feel about making changes in the AO2 space in schools, and also, how strong you are as a group. So in something that is unique to the collective bargaining process is protected industrial action. So this is something that is only available to union members. So you do have to be a union member to take protected industrial action. I'm sure many of you who are online did take part in some form of action last time around. So that's essentially where union members get together and say, okay, so our EB has expired. What we have available to us to help balance the inherent power imbalance between the group of employees and their employer, who in your instance happens to be the state of Queensland, and that process is called protected industrial action. So we will be talking to members when we get back in term 4 about what exactly that looks like. Our delegates have previously indicated that they are keen to ballot members. So ultimately members get to have the say on what it is that you might like to do, when you do it, and what sort of action you do want to take. So when we think about how we have been successful in previous campaigns and how we have actually made change, particularly when it comes to collective bargaining, there are a couple of aspects to that we need to make sure we are working on and constantly improving. So of course, getting members active and involved, and we have more members joining every day. I would absolutely suggest that AO2s are the significant, like when we talk about the newer members who are joining as part of this campaign, AO2s would definitely be the biggest cohort there. And I think as well, it's really important to remember, and I know, if you are 1 or 2 AO2s in a school, it can feel really hard to, I can understand why you might think, well, how can I make a difference? You know, it's only me and my colleague, or sometimes it's only me. But when you think about it, AO2s are 100% the biggest public service cohort in the Department of Education. If getting together, you know, taking action together absolutely sends a really important message, because there are literally thousands of you across the state. So you are a very strong group. So, and once again, of course, it's only union members who can take protected industrial action as well. In addition to having active members, we also need to have a network of activists and delegates. So, of course, we do have activists and delegates who are already involved in the campaign, who are attending negotiations, who are providing feedback as to where to next, but we are always on the lookout for them. What is so important about having activists and delegates is because you are the experts. You're the people who know your work. You're the people who know, particularly if we are talking about things like work bans, you will know what has the most impact. And you ultimately, you know, you are the ones who need to have a say about where we go to with this campaign, what action it might be that our admin members take in schools to actually make a real difference there. And of course, you know, that is all about members making decisions and being part of that, that democratic process to actually, you know, put some pressure on your employer to say, this is something that we are very serious about, and we're not going to go, you know, we're in it for the long haul, and we're here to make some change. So, yeah, sorry, I'm just filling this one. Oh, yeah. So, one thing that we did want to ask, given that we, you know, do have the opportunity today to speak to so many of you, would you like to be a contact for your school? You know, that really depends. However much you want to be active, it depends on you. So it might just be that you're the person that, if we have an organiser coming out to your school, they can give you a call beforehand and say, hey, you know, if I come this Thursday, is there anything that I need to know in terms of making sure we can speak to as many school support staff as possible? Or it could be that you want to get really involved. This is something that you're really passionate about, and you want to be part of, you know, the delegate steering committee who make decisions about that. So it really is a little bit of a choose your own adventure when we talk about being a contact in your school, but it is also, given the nature of the work in the Department of Education, you are a very, of course, you know, there are so many work sites, so many schools across the state. So ensuring that we do have some good coverage across the regions, across all of the other, you know, different types of schools as well that we have. So really encourage you to consider becoming part of a contact, particularly during this EB campaign, because sometimes we will have to move very quickly in terms of getting feedback from members and members making decisions about next steps in the campaign. So that's why it is so important as well that we do have contacts that we can be in touch with you and say, hey, can you talk to, you know, the five closest schools to you? I know that you've got networks there. So really do encourage you to have a think about becoming a contact. And if you've voted yes that you would like to be a contact for your school, we'll have somebody be in touch with you to talk through what that might look like and how you might want to get involved as well. So thank you everyone for that. And now we have just gone over 12:30, so I did want to wrap up this afternoon, but thank you so much everyone for taking the time out from school holidays to be part of this. Certainly won't be the last time that we're reaching out to particularly our AO members in schools to say, this is the latest, this is what the department said, what are we going to do about it? You know, where to next rather. So if I can just ask you to please keep checking your union communications, you know, make sure you're letting us know if you're not getting the emails from us, sign up to be a contact. And I think really importantly, just talking to, you know, the networks, the informal networks that I know that you have within schools about if this is something that's important to them, then it's time to, you know, get on board, join the campaign, become a union member if they're not already. And finally, of course, as always, if you do have any questions, speak to your local organiser, but you know, the central point as well for you to interact with, to make sure that you're getting answers to anything that you might have questions around, please use education@together.org.au. So thank you again, everyone, so much for your time this afternoon. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the rest of your school holidays and no doubt speak to you more in term 4. So take care, everybody, and thanks again.